This lesson is a companion lesson to my introduction to the barriers to critical thinking. Number 6 of that list is disinformation, and that's really not discussed in the textbook to my satisfaction. So I'm adding this full but short lesson on specifically how disinformation can be a barrier to critical thinking, and more important, what we can do to tear that barrier down or avoid it. So first of all, let's make sure I am clarifying what I'm talking about here. So misinformation is simply when people get the facts wrong. They don't know that they've gotten the facts wrong, but they unintentionally haven't done all of their homework. This happens in journalism, it happens in conversation, it happens all the time. But misinformation is simply information that's inaccurate, but not purposefully so. Disinformation is false information that is delivered to people on purpose. In other words, the source of the information knows it's wrong and delivers it out there, puts it out there for a purpose. They have a reason for doing it. And that is part of what I want to talk about here is make sure that you are looking for both misinformation and disinformation and not allowing it to be a barrier to your critical thinking process. The key to all of this is to focus on identifying the source of the information. Google, the internet, is not necessarily a source of information. It's only a method to go out and get information. The website that you eventually see the information on may not be the source. It may just be passing along information. So what you want to do is keep looking until you identify the original source of the information, its context and purpose. And we'll talk a little bit more in a different lesson about various ways to use the internet to do that. But do not be satisfied until you know where this information came from. In other words, if there's a news story about, say, research on a new drug, that news story is not your source. The research that was done, the paper that the story is about, is the source. And if you want to really be able to understand information and determine whether it's accurate or applicable to you, you need to keep going until you actually read the source. Now, we don't have the time to do that for everything. And so you also want to pick news sources or information sources that you can trust. And there are very few of them out there. Most of the sources that we are looking at are not reliable. But the most important thing you can do if you really want to find out is to keep digging until you find the original source, its context and purpose. This approach has been around for a long time. It was originally introduced as part of a research paper, I think in 2019. It's still as valid as ever. This was produced by a professor who I think just applies some common sense here, but it's helpful to review steps that you can take to identify whether information you are looking at is accurate, in context, and is being applied for the right purpose, or whether it is misinformation or disinformation. And so here are the steps that are recommended. I've placed the URL for the website if you want to dig deeper here on this slide. So first of all, and this is perhaps the most important, is stop and take a deep breath. Just stop when you are searching something. What often happens is people will do a Google search and they will see the stuff that pops into their computer, on their phone screen, whatever, and it's a list of headlines and links. You will notice that mostly at the very top, those are going to be sponsored links, which means someone has paid to put them there. So automatically you want to understand, why did they pay for that privilege to be at the top of the list? The next thing is You're going to see a lot of various headlines. That is not far enough. You need to eventually look through that list and then decide which ones to click and open. And of course, again, because of phishing, because of spam, because of malware, we have to be careful about what we open. And so you want to learn to identify websites that you trust. But you can't just do a Google search and then say, well, there it is. I looked at the answers on my page, and now I know. You probably don't know, and in fact, you might know less than you did before you looked at it, because it might be sending you off in bad directions. Either way, you want to, again, if you're serious about understanding it and making sure that it's accurate, you want to investigate it. Keep going until you identify, where did this originally come from? Who said it, or who did the research? What are they about? That kind of thing. And if it doesn't meet standards, if it's not, an appropriate information source, and that could be a whole other class on. In fact, I used to teach a graduate course at Gonzaga University just on disinformation, a full 8-week, full-on 3-credit course for graduate students at Gonzaga on disinformation. That's how much you can really get into it. Keep looking until you find a source that you can trust, and then go further to identify the sources that source used. Now, I understand you can get fully into the weeds here and you don't have the time to do all of this, but when it's important, before you pass along information that you have searched, make sure that you have done your homework following this 4-step process to do everything you can to make sure that the information is accurate, in context, and provided for the right purpose. One of the things you can do to help you engage in the critical thinking process when it comes to information you're getting on the internet is to look for whether the source has, or the website has, a tab called About or About Us, where you can go in and look at their background. Who is it? How are they funded? What's their purpose? What's their history? And if they don't have an About or an About Us tab, probably you just need to walk away. That's telling you that they don't want you to know. Reuters is an international news organization. Again, I used to work closely with Reuters. One of the companies I worked for also owned Reuters back in the day, and so I'm familiar with their work. I find them to be highly trustworthy and accurate. But again, here you can go in and read their About tab, and it tells you what their values are, how they go about doing their work. And then it leads you to, if you want to look at their trust principles, you can click on that and learn more about how they do their work. Any website that doesn't provide that basic information, or doesn't provide it in a comprehensive way, or provides it and tells you that they have an agenda or their funding is worrisome or what have you, those are all red flags about whether to use that information that comes from that source. My wife and I have long played this game where when we say, hey, did you hear? The other one will say, so what's your source? And of course, this comes from my time in journalism and my time teaching about these subjects. But what we often do when we're out wandering through the internet is we see these memes like this that quote certain people. Probably the vast majority of those, in my experience, are simply either inaccurate, the person being quoted didn't say it, or no one knows if they really said it. It's just been around for a long time and we don't know whether it's an accurate, authentic quote. Or it might be something the person said, but it's pulled out of context. So it meant something entirely different when taken inside the full context of the quotation. So just as a rule, when you see a quote out there, even if it's from Brainy Quotes or other, unless they show you step by step where that information came from. Thomas Jefferson, for example, all of his papers, his letters, his conversations, written conversations, are available now, almost all of them now available online through the University of Virginia's website, which he founded. Thomas Jefferson founded UVA, of course, a couple hundred years ago. But you can go in and determine whether something that you're reading was actually from Thomas Jefferson, or there are, George Washington or whatever, and whether it's being put out there in the appropriate context. Start by not believing it and work your way toward, okay, now I have the context, I have the information I need to be able to make my decision. One of the things that often drives me totally batty is when someone says, if I ask, what's your source? Well, the internet, I Googled it. Okay, so what was your source? It's sort of like saying, well, where did you go on vacation? And you say, well, I went to I-15. No, that's how you got from one place to another. If you went on vacation at I-15, sorry, but you need to plan better vacations. So the internet is just the medium through which we travel to add information, and it doesn't necessarily deliver us good information. In fact, more often than not, it delivers us really bad information. It is agnostic. The internet doesn't care about whether what it's giving you is accurate or not. No one is out there policing it, and that's never going to happen. You have to police it yourself. So keep looking until you find sources that are reliable. And I encourage you to so we're going to do some things in this class. You're going to have a project or a paper, not a big lift, but part of the process of doing that will be practicing these steps and using the steps and combining those with critical thinking to be able to identify good information and separate it out from all of the lousy information, the bad information, the misinformation and disinformation that is swirling around us 24/7.